day everyone, and welcome to your channel Chess Shorts and Sweets. In this video I'm going to talk to you about the Caro-Kann defense. A lot of us, when they play with the black pieces, we don't usually know initially which defense should we establish a repertoire for. And if you try to figure out and read about it, you will find out that there are some defenses for both the e4 and the d4 openings, and that will leave you even more confused. So if you are in the beginner or the intermediate levels and you don't know yet which defense that you should use, I highly recommend this defense, the Caro-Kann defense. It's one of the most powerful and most solid defenses you will ever play with, defending your game. It will secure you a very solid position. It's gonna be difficult for white to break through it. This video is going to be the first of a series of videos that will teach you the Caro-Kann defense in details. So that could be a good library for you to come back to whenever you need to learn anything about the Caro-Kann defense. So stay tuned and let's begin. So the Caro-Kann is mainly directed against the e4 move. You still can play it after the d4 move as well. And the reason is, after white plays e4, you respond with c6. And since you've left the center unoccupied for white, white will most likely control more space in the center and go for d4 as well. And the opposite can happen. If white starts with d4, you can go c6 and then they will go with e4. So that's the beauty about the Caro-Kann. You can play c6 or you can play the Caro-Kann in general in response to any of these moves, the e4 or d4. The Caro-Kann in general requires minimal memorization, so you don't need to exhaust your brain with many moves or lines to memorize. If you learn very basic moves, you should be fine, absolutely fine with the Caro-Kann. So after d4, you play d5. You challenge the center immediately, and white's famous three options here is to ignore you and play something like knight c3, or they can take on d5 or advance their pawn to e5, and that's what we are going to talk about today, the advance variation. So the advance variation is when white advances their pawn to e5. And here you have to remember something in the opening here, especially about this light square bishop. So first, you get it out before you play e6. That's the first thing you need to remember, and that's the first minor piece you should start developing in the Caro-Kann. So this bishop has to get to be out first before you play e6, because if you play e6 early, you will block this bishop development, and it's going to struggle the whole game to get a decent square to be developed on. So you get the bishop out first, and after white goes, for example, knight f3, you play e6. e6 here is an important move. You support the center more, and you create a square for that knight to jump on in the future, because that knight cannot be developed here anymore. The second thing you need to remember about this light square bishop is you want to trade it for a similar material. You can trade it for the white light square bishop, or ideally with the knight here. And the reason is, as you can see, your pawns are actually on, most of your pawns are on light squares, controlling and defending, a huge number of the light squares. So this bishop actually is not a very good bishop for you, since you're controlling the light squares. So you need to trade it for similar material whenever you can. And that's the second thing you need to remember about this light square bishop. Okay, so the game carries on. Bishop e2. The white here is preparing to castle, And here you may think that you need to also get your minor pieces out and start the development. But I highly recommend to play c5 here instead of going for development. This move is important and it secures you a very solid defensive position later on. It challenges white's central pawns immediately, yeah? And white has to respond appropriately to this move. So they can either play c3, support and defend this pawn, or they can ignore you and castle. They can't actually take early here. And the reason is, if they took early on the c5 square, this bishop here can take back. And look at this bishop aiming for the f2 square. And also this bishop enjoying this diagonal as well. You're ready to get your knight out and castle. You have two central bishops and white is aware about that. Still, white has to develop their pieces. Since white is aware about this, they don't take initially, they don't take early. So they play either c3 or they go castling. Most likely they will go castling. And here, remember, you have to play the knight first on c6 before you take. And after white, support with c3, here you can take, and after the exchange, you have no problem. Why? Because if you decided to take early, and for example, you didn't play knight to c6, and you decided to take early here, white can simply take back with the knight, and they will threat this bishop here. Of course, if white takes this bishop with the knight, you don't want to take back with this pawn, because you will distort your central pawn structure. So instead you go defend with the knight. But after this move, white has the option of pinning the knight to the queen. And here, look at this position and let's analyze it for 1 minute. White has already castled. White has got 3 minor pieces out already, with 1 central pawn. Ready to go knight to c3, bring the rook to c1. But here, the black player is actually struggling with this bishop, which can't find a good development square. Black hasn't still castled. You still have to develop your knight and your queen, so white here is much better. So that's why you play first knight to c6. You don't take early on d4. And after knight c6, white will support with c3, and after the exchange, you don't have the problem, you don't have the threat of this knight going on the d4 square. And if, for example, white decided to take with the knight, you can simply take back and the game is going to be more or less equal. So that's the main line for the advanced variation. Let's have another look at another variation. You can play e4, c6, d4, d5. That's the Caro-Kann. And after white advance, you can go here for early c5. Early c5 is, I like that line especially in blitz games, because white has to really know how to respond to this. The most critical move is when white takes. So white can take, white can support with c3, or can ignore this completely and go, for example, knight to f3. So most commonly they will take on the c5, and after they take, you bring out your knight on c6 and you immediately threaten the pawn on the e5. And this pawn, white cannot do much to save it. If they decided to move their pawn around, they would lose control over the squares on the king side. So most commonly they will defend with the knight. And here you have the option to pin that knight to the queen. Again, you want to take back your pawn. And for white to get rid of this pin, they will play bishop to e2. And after that, you can play e6 safely, opening this diagonal for this bishop and threatening to take back immediately this pawn. So you will win material in the next move. White can't do much to save this pawn. White can't defend with b4, because you will simply take with the knight. Sorry. So most commonly they will just go for castling. You capture back, you first capture the knight before you capture the pawn, and after the exchange you can capture with the bishop. And after they get the bishop out, you play the good move, bishop to d4, and you will win material on the next move. If, for example, white decided to block the attack on the rook with c3, you capture on a5, and after the exchange, the game is going to be okay for you. You're threatening that bishop here. You're ready to go for the knight on the f6. Prepare to castle. You can bring your queen to b6 and the rook to c8, and you have a very good position. One more thing to remember about the advanced variation is when white tries to set a trap for you, trapping the light square bishop, and that can be translated on the board as e4, c6, d4, d5, and after white advance their pawn to e5, you go bishop to f5, and here white is aware that your next move will be e6. So they will try to set a trap for this bishop by playing h4, threatening to go g4 after that. So white is trying to siege this light square bishop. Eventually it will be, trapped. So the best here is to block this move, the g4 move, with h5. In case they play it, you take simply and you save that bishop. What will happen if you ignore that and play, for example, e6 straight away? Here you will lose this bishop. So white can easily go g5, and think about it here for a minute. This bishop is actually going to be trapped. If you try to jump here on the e4 square, white can block the attack on the rook with f3, and after you go back on the g6 square, white can go h5, and this bishop actually is going to be trapped eventually. So this is something to remember about the advanced variation. The TAL variation is when you go with your bishop to f5, white goes h4, threatening to go g4 on the next move. So don't go e6 after that. Instead you block g4 with h5. So these are the main three ideas of the advanced variation. I hope you guys found this video quite useful to you. Stay tuned for more videos about the Caro-Kann defense. Write to me in the comment section below your thoughts and any suggestions. I'm really happy to hear it, read it, and respond to it, of course. Till then, have a good day, guys, and I hope to see you soon.